Good morning and welcome to Rising. We have a great show for you today, along with a new face. I'm Amber Duke, joined at the desk by Dan Kanninen.
Hey, Amber.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Thanks
Great to be
for being here.
I'm super excited to be here.
Great. Well, let's jump right into the news. Mike Waltz is officially out as National Security Advisor and could be stepping into a new role, United States Ambassador to the United Nations. President Trump wrote on Truth Social, from his time in uniform on the battlefield, in Congress, and as my National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz has worked hard to put our nation's interests first. I know he will do the same in his new role. Meanwhile, Secretary of State Marco Rubio will serve as the interim National Security Advisor. Users on social media are sounding off about the decision and calling out Waltz for Signalgate. The Federalist editor-in-chief Molly Hemingway writes, "I like Mike Waltz, but we should probably not forget the tragic mistake of adding Jeffrey Goldberg, of all people in the universe, to a Signal chat. Lots of journalists just kind of skidding right over that."
Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer says, now do Hegseth. So, should more people be punished for Signalgate like Schumer suggests?
All right, so I think this was probably a long time coming. In fact, if anything, from what I'm hearing from Republican sources, is that Mike Waltz's problems with Signalgate, I guess we could say,
Yeah.
his issue with adding Jeffrey Goldberg to that chat actually prolonged his tenure because Trump did not want to give a scalp to the Atlantic.
Right.
And so he was clashing with administration officials prior to that. He's obviously more hawkish compared to some of the non-interventionist members of the administration. And then he gets the gift of the Atlantic attacking him, so he gets to sort of skate by for a little bit, which is really a shame because he should have been held accountable for Signalgate, I think, from the get-go. But I think conservatives who are big fans of Trump's America First agenda will probably have no love lost for Mike Waltz leaving his role as National Security Advisor.
I think that's probably right. And I think that Mike Waltz also, from his politics before his time in the administration, wasn't always a MAGA, never or a Trump guy, right? He came into this world a little bit later than others did. But I think the real question for Democrats and for those watching this with Signalgate is not so much how it affects Waltz and his prospects of becoming ambassador to the UN. I think it's much more about what this means for the investigation into Signalgate. Mick Mulvaney last night in The Hill made this point really well, that this opens up the door for Democrats and others to probe deeper into what happened, not just with adding Jeffrey Goldberg. That was a huge mistake, and I think obviously enraged Trump. But the question for me is, what does that mean for the others on that chain, for sharing that information? Pete Hegseth has shared it with other chains, including his family and folks outside of the government, a private lawyer. That kind of reckless abuse of national security information is going to get really a microscopic analysis by House Democrats. I think that could come back to bite, maybe not Waltz, but maybe Hegseth.
Right, and Hegseth, of course, has been in the news for quite some time because of these secondary abuses that you've talked about, for good reason, I think. And I know that Trump and Vance have said that they're standing by Pete Hegseth, but I know that Republicans are starting to get pretty wary of his ability to do the job properly, and I think it's obviously reasonable to say that if you share private details, potentially classified details about upcoming strikes on U.S. adversaries, that's a huge problem, and that should be bipartisan, in my opinion. The thing that's interesting about pushing Mike Waltz over to the UN ambassador role, first of all, Elise Stefanik must be livid.
Oof. And how?
Right? But I think it's kind of a way to say, well, I didn't fire him, he's just being reassigned, and kind of trying to tamp down some of the what will be scuttlebutt about, the administration's in chaos, Trump is losing people, and he gets to kind of rein Mike Waltz in, because let's be real, when you're UN ambassador, your job is to read a script, right? You get your marching orders from the administration, you go to the UN meetings, and you say what's on the paper in front of you. He can't really go rogue, he can't bring in staffers that maybe are counter to the America First idea of foreign policy. He has to stay on message.
I think that's right. And your point about Stefanik, I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think the whole politics of this is on this precarious posture for Trump and for the administration. Remember, Stefanik is not there in the first place because the House is so narrow, and they can't pass these bills without her vote, that they couldn't get her out of that caucus. And so Waltz goes there to fill that gap and fix that problem. Okay, fine, and you're right, that was a convenient way to get him out of this national security advisor role, which Trump was obviously eager to do at this point. But all this means, I think, whether it's the Republicans' uncomfortable posture with Pete Hegseth, not just because of how he's sharing information, but how he's managing the department. I hear all the time that they're really happy about the troop and military recruitment numbers. Like that's the thing he's doing that they think is fantastic. And Trump likes him on TV. Trump likes him as this attack dog. But those that want the Pentagon managed well have to be just enraged and flummoxed by Hegseth. And we all knew this going in. This is a guy with no military experience, no management experience in the military, that is, right? He's been a Fox News host. He's certainly had some service, which is laudable. But to never have run a big organization, and the small organizations that he did run had these massive problems financially and otherwise. And so to me, there's this lapse of judgment with Signalgate, but there's this bigger question of just experience. And so you've got this guy running the Pentagon that Republicans don't really trust to run the Pentagon, and now you've got Mike Waltz going to the UN. All of it, I think, is just on this bed of precarious politics that could bite the administration at some point.
Yeah, and you've also seen several high-profile staffers from the DoD exit recently and being accused of leaking, which is, the whole thing is very strange. These people are insistent that they did not leak anything. They're people who are pretty well trusted in the conservative movement.
Yeah.
Hegseth, however, has gone on TV and gone very fiery about the idea that they were totally sharing classified info, but all of the people who left were notably people who were counter to some of the hawkish tendencies of the neoconservatives. And so to me, it seems like more of an ideological battle that's taking place in both DoD and the State Department, rather than this battle over competency or leaking information and things like that.
I think it's that. I mean, look at John Bolton. You know, definitely someone who's a neocon and a hawk on this stuff. Not a fan necessarily where Donald Trump goes on national security or some of his more controversial decisions at this point. But I think it's partly the policy, disagreement that you point out. But I think also it's about, are you going to come in and have just total fidelity to Donald Trump, never admit a mistake, like just stick to the plan? And what Trump likes about Hegseth is that he will do whatever Donald Trump wants him to do. If that means getting rid of, high-ranking officials, if that means cleaning house, if that means being on attack on TV, he will do that. Trump likes that. He hated the idea in his first term that his chief of staff or the chairman of the Joint Chiefs or other military advisors would tell him not to do things. He wants folks that will just, be empowered by his word at full stop at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's a little more complicated than that, because there were individuals who were sort of undermining and trying to subvert Trump's agenda rather than just telling him things that he didn't want to hear. For example, the Afghanistan withdrawal, there were multiple defense secretaries who were trying to slow walk that from Donald Trump. And so I think it's reasonable for the executive to want to exercise some semblance of political control over his appointees, rather than just it being like a blind loyalty type of question. But at the same time, what you say about Hegseth in terms of his competency, I think what people liked about the nomination and the appointment was that he did bring fresh ideas to the DoD, to the Pentagon, but you have to be able to execute those well. And that's something that I think a lot of Republicans and conservatives are kind of concerned about at this point, is he doing the execution properly? Yeah,
there are 2 million employees and a $1 trillion budget. Like if you never managed something, more than a couple dozen people, and that's the experience of Pete Hegseth, pretty hard to imagine leveling up that quickly to something this big, this complicated, and execute your ideas. And he said something in an interview, one of the tarmac interviews, when the Signalgate was really raging, that I just caught and thought it was so telling about what he sees as his role in this administration. He talked about how all he was doing was reporting out, to the others on that chain what was happening at CENTCOM. And I thought to myself, boy, if you are the Secretary of Defense and you think your job is just to report out like you're the White House liaison to DOD, that's really such an underselling of the value and the gravitas of that role. And I think, again, Trump sees him as someone who will be a face of the department, focus on recruitment, do what he wants him to do, but never has this person had the experience to run the department as complicated as this.
And just one quick analogy before we wrap. If you look at what's going on the immigration side of things, he does have the face in Kristi Noem running Department of Homeland Security, but he has an experienced individual in Tom Homan actually executing the vision for the policy as the borders are. And on the Pentagon side of things, you have Hegseth as the face, but it doesn't seem like there's a similar Tom Homan-esque person who is helping him actually run the department and execute the vision.
And they let go some of the folks that maybe had that position or posture.
Exactly. All right. Up next, bad news for NPR and PBS. We'll tell you what it is here on Rising.